Fine. So let me start by sort of introducing myself for those who maybe don't know much about my background, but I basically come from a family of art dealers. We have galleries, an auction house. We've been dealers in Impressionist and modern art for many, many years. And I also have a banking background. I worked for 10 years in private banking for Citigroup, managing investment portfolios. And in 2007, I decided to leave banking and focus on my growing passion for collecting contemporary art. And I started to do different types of activities. One company I was involved in as chairman of the board was a company called Artist Pension Trust, which maybe some of you have heard of, which was an innovative idea that enables artists, practicing artists, to save for their long-term pension through a pooling program. And I invested in that company because I believed that it was an interesting way to bring financial investors closer to the art market and get a broad exposure to contemporary art as an asset class. And on the other hand, was providing a truly needed service for artists. And you will see that throughout all the activities that I've done in the past 10 years, really those two missions are at the core of everything I do. I'm trying to, bring collectors with an investment angle closer to the art world through the activities, and also really benefit emerging artists all over the world. And in Israel, I started START. You see the logo on the bottom left here on the screen, and I'll talk more about START later, but basically that was also something I started immediately in 2008, and it's been running ever since. And that's an incubator project similar to venture capital incubators in a sense. It's supporting talented people, but instead of supporting companies, they found supporting artistic practices and giving them advice and guidance and opening doors for them and funding some of their projects. I'll talk more about START later. What I think Elena specifically wanted me to talk about was the Tiroche DeLeon collection. And that's a collection I founded in 2011. And it bears the name of my co-founder, Russ DeLeon. Russ DeLeon and I have known each other for several years. I was advising his family on their overall wealth when they created a Gibraltar family office. And I was helping them do their asset allocation. And at some point, Russ came up to me and said, look, I know you're also very involved in the art world, and I'm curious to start collecting art and looking at it from an investment perspective. And I said to Russ, this is amazing. This is exactly what I needed, is an anchor investor, because I've had this idea to set up an art fund for, since I was a student at INSEAD, which was in 97. So it was an idea I graduated in 97. And it was an idea I was developing in my mind for a very long term, and I knew exactly how I wanted to do it, which was unlike any other fund done before me. It was really modeled on what I saw as the best practices of collecting contemporary art by some of the best collectors in the world. How they promote the artists, how they show their artworks, how they select, the long-term approach they take, the lending activity to museums, and all of that I wanted to build into the model of an art fund, which was something that was unheard of before that. I think most art funds, are black boxes where really nobody knows what they own, and they're not open to the public, and they're not open to museums and so on to borrow work from, and to curators. So that was the starting point, and this was early in 2011. And we had a sort of a $10 million budget to start with. And very quickly, we started traveling around the world. I knew I wanted to invest in developing markets. And why did I choose developing markets? For several reasons. The first reason was that with this kind of budget, I knew that if I wanted to do anything that was of any significance, if I invested $10 million in Western contemporary art, I wouldn't be able to build anything significant. That's not enough money, basically, to build a serious collection. On the other hand, in developing markets, the prices of art, relatively speaking, were, especially if you look back to 2011, were still very, very affordable. And there was no one who was, actively and in a transparent manner focusing on those markets. So I started traveling to India and China and Brazil and Russia and lots of other places around the developing world, acquiring works for the Tiroche DeLeon collection. And I think because of that strategy and because of that approach, we've managed to differentiate ourselves as a fund and also as a collection. And we're quite unique in that we represent a whole generation from the past, from 2011 onwards, basically, of the best emerging artists in emerging markets. So that's what's unique about the Tiroche DeLeon collection. And obviously, some other things you'll see in the presentation is what people say about us in terms of our transparency as well. At the end of the presentation, I'll just throw in a few words about ArtRunners, which is a new startup I founded about 2.5, 3 years ago, which again, in a way, is meant to enable a more efficient art ecosystem. Okay, here are some key messages about the fund. Some of them I spoke of, but really for me, the key message is that personally, what I'm trying to do is bridge my passion for collecting with my know-how from an investment standpoint and offer that bridge to wealthy individuals, families, and even, I'm thinking now about setting up another fund. And in this case, I'm hoping to get some institutional investors in pension funds and large family offices. What was written about us when we launched, I think the key message that was, a big differentiator was the fact that we were transparent in an industry that was very, very veiled. This is what Melanie Gerlis wrote about us in the art newspaper. The key distinction is our transparency. And that transparency takes many, many forms. If you visited our website, you would see that there's huge amounts of information available there on the website. What artists we buy, which galleries we work with, where are the works located, what are the financial returns we make on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis, how is our portfolio allocated across regions, how is it allocated across mediums, information about our best performing works and our worst performing works when we sell them. And there's also information, if you look here, on the bottom left, you'll see also information about our realized portfolio. We provide statistics that are real, factual, audited numbers. I think it's one of the only places where you can get real returns on artworks. So far, since we launched the fund in 2011, like I said, we've sold, the fund today comprises about 450 works. The total value is $20 million, as you can see up here. We have zero leverage, so basically it's all equity. Our return since inception, and this return is based on mark-to-market that we get auction houses to do for us on an annual basis. So it's an external valuation of the portfolio. Based on that, our year-to-date, our return since inception is 23%. And you can really follow us basically on a quarterly basis on Bloomberg. You can see the results of the fund. And here on this left table, we have some examples of the best and worst performing works from out of the 54 that we've sold in terms of IRR. So the highest IRR was for a Mona Hatoum work, which we bought and resold for a significant profit, but the IRR is distorted because the time period was very, very short. It was a month. So that inflates the IRR very much. So it's an anomaly. But works like Abudia are examples of artists that we buy very early. We identify, new talents, and in a relatively short period of time, and we buy 7, 8, 9 examples of the work, and in a relatively short period of time, the prices increase and the secondary market develops, and we're able to sell works at much higher prices, and that provides significant IRRs. Another one is Rodel Tapaya from the Philippines, which is a similar example. On the other hand, we just sold works by Pavel Pepperstein, a Russian artist, and the Russian market is obviously, as some of you know, if you follow it, it's a very weak market. And recently we've started selling works even in where we have losses because we're at this stage in the fund's life now where we have to concentrate on the best works and start to sell the less good ones. But in total, if you look at our realized portfolio, we've sold 54 works, as I said, for a total of $7 million. And the IRR, the gross IRR on those works is 20%, which is a phenomenal number. And I would be extremely happy if when we sold everything else, we could even, on average 15% IRR on a gross basis, which would leave investors with about 10% net. And that's really our target at the end of the fund's life. What's interesting to note here is this line called average premium to book value. And this basically tells you that when we sell the works, we compare the price we actually receive, the net price we receive, to the value of that work in our books based on the valuation that we get from the auction houses. So what this tells you is that on average, all these works that we've sold, the $7 million of works, the 54 works, on average, they produced a return that is 12.4% higher than the value in the books. This basically shows you that our NAV of 20,246,000 is a conservative NAV because in reality, based on this sample, we achieved 12.4% better than the value in the books. So that's an example. That's some of the example of the transparency we provide. Also, if you understand finance, you will note I didn't show it to you, but if you go on our website and you look at our quarterly fact sheets, you will see that there's also a table that shows allocations and correlations to other asset classes. And you will see that our correlation as a fund to other asset classes is really, really low. We measure it on a continuous basis. We have almost zero correlation to, equities, bonds, private equity, real estate, even hedge funds. Our correlation to any of those asset classes is extremely low, which means from a portfolio construction standpoint, from a portfolio theory standpoint, if you can add, the more asset classes you can add in the portfolio that have low correlation to other asset classes, the better your portfolio will be in terms of the risk-return profile. So for every specific level of risk that you take, you will increase the expected return of that portfolio, the more uncorrelated assets you include. So that means from a very purely theoretical standpoint that including art or an investment in the Tiroche DeLeon collection in your overall portfolio makes sense. And this is what Jonathan Lurie says, founder and CEO of Cheney Capital, who's on the advisory board of the fund. This is an example, again, talking about our transparency. I also send quarterly newsletters out. We have over 6,000 followers in the art world that read these quarterly reports that I produce. And you're welcome to subscribe. You can go onto the website, www.tirochedeleon.com, and subscribe to the website. You can do that also on my Instagram. And you will receive quarterly updates where I talk about what's happening in the art world, in the art market, in biennales, important exhibitions I've seen. I put up links to important, what I think are significant articles and developments in the art market and research papers I've read. And also we show, works we've bought, works we've put out on loan, and publicize some talks that I do or articles that have been published about us, etc., etc. So once a quarter, all our investors and other people who follow our activity get a newsletter that looks a little bit like this. Again, as part of sharing what I know, and also giving, we also do spotlights on specific artists that we discover. So that's a way to promote artists and to share my knowledge with other people around the world. This is a shot from a panel we had with Hans-Ulrich Obrist and Catherine Pettiga at Mana Contemporary in New Jersey, where we did an exhibition of highlights from our Latin American collection. This was a fantastic exhibition. I'll show you one or two images here, but that's really one of the ways also that we act differently as a fund. We work with outside curators to create meaningful exhibitions and show them in amazing locations, and we get credited for that. And that's also a way to create value for our investors, because the works get visibility. We build the brand name for the collection, and this all adds up in terms of value. What was written about us when we did this, it was during Art Basel in Miami in 2015. This was the Miami Herald cover of the weekend paper, which is the most read. And on the cover of the paper, it said that the cream of the crop of Art Basel is the Tiroche DeLeon collection at Mana Contemporary. So that was an amazing, I don't know how to say it, but validation of our business model and our work and the type of works that we buy. What you see here are two major works by the Brazilian duo Os Gêmeos that we have in the collection. Here's another installation shot from the exhibition in Miami, and here we have this major work on the left by a Brazilian artist called Paulo Nazareth, which, as you can see, it's a major installation work as well, similar to the Os Gêmeos I showed before, really large-scale works. And I'll talk a little bit about this later on, but this is pretty unusual for a fund. If you're only thinking about financial return, buying large-scale works like this by artists is probably not your best strategy. But this is something we did, very open-mindedly. It was part of our strategy from the beginning, because we wanted to position the collection as a significant curatorial endeavor as well. And we wanted to open it up to curators and make it interesting for the public to see. And so, many of my investors come into this fund not only because they want to make financial returns, but also because they want to be part of this project. They want to help emerging artists. They're willing to take bets like this with me, and do something that has some significance from an art historic standpoint as well. But as you've seen, it can also pay off financially. So that's what's really different, I think, about our approach. Here's another example of the work that we showed in New Jersey. This is a huge Ernesto Neto work. It's 18 meters long, and it's actually a very significant work for Ernesto in his whole oeuvre, because he made this for his own wedding. He actually got married in this installation. He and his wife walked through, came in on one side and came out on the other side married. That was there was a whole, ceremony that this work was part of. So it's a work that's very significant for the artist. And again, this demonstrates the types of works that we get access to as a fund. When we go to galleries, we get access to, really very high quality works that most often, individual collectors would not get access to, only institutions or big collections like ours. Here's an example of another, major work. We have a Gitish Kalat work here that we lent to the Tel Aviv Museum for an exhibition on contemporary art from India. This is a work by a Chinese artist called Guan Zhao. Again, many of you probably don't know her, but when we bought this, she was relatively unknown, but since then her career has exploded. This was included in the Triennale in the new museum in 2015. We bought this in 2014. And since then, she's gone on to show all over the place. K11, Palais de Tokyo, don't remember, Biennales, whatever, lots. I mean, her career is through the roof. This is a work by Shilpa Gupta, an Indian artist. Again, as you can see, it's very large scale and significant. And this is currently still, I believe, in Kassel. It was there for Documenta this year. It was in a church in the middle of Kassel. Fantastic installation called I Keep Falling at You, which is also an example of our lending program, because this work is on a long-term loan to the ZKM in Karlsruhe. It's on a 7-year loan to the museum in Karlsruhe. And from Karlsruhe, it's been lent to many other exhibitions over the years, including this one in Documenta. This is an Ai Weiwei piece, which is perhaps the most significant work in our collection. This is from when it was shown at the Mori Art Museum, but since then it's been shown in 10, 12 different museums around the world. It's currently, right now, actually on a second loan to the De Pont Museum in Holland. They showed it the first time about 5 years ago, and now they did an anniversary, 25-year anniversary called Review the exhibition, and they chose the best works from all the exhibitions over the last 25 years that they had in the museum. And so they requested this work again 5 years later, and it's now there if you're in Holland by chance. This is me with Weiwei. I mean, one of the things that I do a lot, which is also kind of unusual for an art fund manager, is that I really take myself out to, meet artists, discover artists, research, go to artist studios, meet collectors, meet curators. I travel nonstop, and if you follow my newsletter, you will be able to, travel with me, at least in your imagination, to all kinds of places and meet all kinds of interesting people. This is, again, an important work by Marina Abramovic that we own in the collection. It's called Rhythm Zero from 1974. A copy of this work, another edition. It's an edition of 3, and all of the editions are in museums. It's edition of 3 plus 1 AP. All of the editions are in museums except this edition, which is in our hands. One of the editions is currently on view also at the Tate. It's part of the Tate collection in the Switch House. You can see another edition of this work. This is a shot from a loan we made to the Tel Aviv Museum. Again, a photo with Marina. This is an interesting, probably an artist you don't know, Gatot Pujihardo from Indonesia. And we did a very interesting collaboration earlier this year. I think it was February this year, in Paris with the Valentino fashion brand for their haute couture exhibition they did for their haute couture fashion show of the spring-summer 2017. They did this big event in a chateau in the middle of Paris, and we collaborated with them, lending 7 or 8 major works from the collection that basically had a dialogue with the dresses and the fashion that was shown, and it gave these works incredible visibility, incredible PR, and it was a beautiful exhibition. So this is the Gatot, and here's an example of other works by Shahriar Ahmadi that were part of this collaboration with Valentino. This is a work by Pravdulyov Ivanov, again, that we own in the collection, an important work of his that talks about migration, which is a very, very topical issue, but this work was already made about 8 or 9 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. But because it's so topical, again, it's been traveling non-stop to all kinds of museum loans. In this case, it's from an installation at the Zakieta National Gallery in Poland. As I said, my traveling also brings me to give talks and share my vision and my passion for what I'm doing. And this is a shot from a panel I organized actually for the Korea Arts Management Services Gallery Weekend in Korea last year in October 2016, about a year ago. And I was invited to be a keynote speaker, but I thought it would be more interesting to bring a few more perspectives. So I invited 2 of my colleagues, collectors, Sylvain Levy from the DSL collection in Paris and Alain Servet from Belgium. And the panel was curated by Unju Park, who wrote a book on collecting, and I was featured in that book, and she's from Korea, so she was a natural moderator. That was a fantastic talk. I mean, most of these talks you can also find online. This is just an example of some article that came after. And more recently, I've been traveling a lot to Africa. I find the African art scene especially interesting. We've been active there since 2011, but more so in the last 2 years. This year alone, I've been to South Africa, to Ghana, to Zimbabwe, to Lagos, to Addis Ababa, and I'm going down to Africa again in February. And this is from my trip to Accra earlier this year, where I met with Ablad Glover, who's basically the godfather of the entire generation of artists in Africa. And these are examples of his fabulous paintings, which we actually bought as well. These are other examples of African works in the collection by Romuald Hazoumeh. And just to show you some of our realized works, this is an abudia that we sold. Again, a young African artist that we discovered several years ago. And we made, you know, this amazing 3 times on our money. We paid 5,000 and sold it for 15,000. It's not a lot of money, but it's, you know, it's huge numbers in terms of IRR. And it was actually a world auction record for abudia. And we've had numerous auction records in the works we sold, which is something we are also kind of proud of, because it speaks to the quality of the works that we buy and how we position, how we help artists develop a secondary market that's robust for them. This is a Yinka Shoni Barre we sold recently at the Sotheby's auction, the first Sotheby's auction of African contemporary art. And this Shoni Barre achieved the world auction record for the artist. We were very proud of that. This is an Ella Natsui piece we owned and sold and made a very substantial profit as well of over $370,000. This is a piece we bought in 2011 and sold in 2013. Another world auction record for a Filipino artist, Rodel Tapaya. We made, as you can see, a 1,662% return over a 5-year period. We bought it for $7,000 in 2011 and sold it for $123,000 in 2016, which is unheard of. It's crazy. It's 93% annual IRR. Another artist we discovered, this is a work by Adrian Villarojas that we actually commissioned him to make specifically for the collection. I discovered him in Argentina in 2011. He was relatively unknown then, but since then has done all the big museum shows and the biennales, and he's everywhere. He just had he still has a whole installation on the roof of the Whitney in New York right now. He did Documenta, he did the new museum, he did Basel, he did the Venice Biennale representing Argentina, etc., etc. And all of this happened after we acquired his work. Oh, he had the opening exhibition of the new wing at the Serpentine Gallery, the Serpentine Sackler Gallery a few years ago. The opening exhibition was Adrian Villarojas. And again, a world auction record. Why is it Kami? Adrian Navarrejao, just to show you, you know, the type of information we share. And now I go to the more, what I think is the more, is what for me is more interesting as what we do when we discover young artists. This is Ruben Pang. Ruben Pang from Singapore, again, an artist I met when he was very, just graduating out of the La Salle College in Singapore. Commissioned him to make a work for us and then invited him as our first artist in residence in 2015. We started a residency program in Israel for artists I discover from all over the world. And Ruben's residency was a great success from every standpoint. I mean, the works he produced were amazing. He got a lot of PR. And, you know, since that time, Ruben has become a superstar in Singapore. He's very well known, and he's developed an auction market, and he's collected broadly all over the world. This is, again, Ruben A couple of years later, I was invited to speak at the conference in Singapore, and I invited Ruben spontaneously onto the stage, and we had a fantastic conversation, and he was welcomed with such applause, like you could tell, like a movie star in Singapore. So very proud of him. And this is a commentary by Ruben about, you know, his time at the residency here. But apart from Ruben, we've had, you know, artists from South Africa. This is Isabel Grobler, and, you know, 7 artists in total. And in 2018, we're going to start an intensive program focused on artists from Africa. We're going to have 8 artists in 2018 coming for residencies in Israel of anywhere between 2 months and 3 months each to do a whole body of works. And at the end of this residency program, I hope to do a traveling exhibition with works by these artists and show it in different places around the world. This is what Isabel said about the residency. I guess you can read it. This is the last residency we had here, again, 2 artists from Africa, Terence Musekwa on the right, which right now, actually these days, has a show at Katinka Tabakaru Gallery in New York, which is getting a lot of press. So you may have read his name recently. Terence is on the right, and on the left we have Mario Masilao, a photographer from Mozambique. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about START, which is my incubator project in Israel. I mentioned it at the beginning of the conversation. Yes.
We have a couple of questions. Maybe you want to answer them now, if you want.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Good time. Yes.
Okay. So I can read them aloud if you want. So Sarah is asking a few questions. Her first one is, besides developing markets, how do you select the artists or the works you invest in? And that, I think, also matches the question from Milor. She's asking if you're the only one who identifies the works to buy, or is there a team involved in the selection?
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm the only one who makes choices for the fund. Most people come to invest with me because they believe in my ability to, you know, select the right artists. And how I do that, like I said, I travel a lot and I do a lot of research. I read a lot all the time. This is my full-time job. And, you know, I meet with artists and I meet with collectors and I meet with curators. But there are several criteria that guide me. I mean, first of all, you know, the initial impact of a work needs to feel new to me, interesting, both aesthetically and from a content point of view. But that's just the first step. What I do after is try to find out how well is the artist supported in his home country. How is he collected? Which curators follow his practice? What type of museum shows has he or she had in the past, and what's in the pipeline? What's coming next? And finally, I think about, you know, after I met this artist, is this someone who's really intelligent, focused, and ambitious? Is it someone who understands the rules of the art ecosystem and can develop as a professional career as an artist? And does the work speak to international audiences? Is it of interest to collectors all over the world or just to local collectors? So all of these factors come into play before I make a decision on who to buy. And as a collection, I think what I try to do also is mostly I buy figurative art. Figurative art, why? Because I feel that it's sort of an antithesis to what's going on in the Western art markets, where a lot of the work is very cerebral. I think a lot of artists in the West have forgot about the element of craft in artwork. And I think our collection tries to show the importance of craft as a practice, and especially where the craft is rooted in the local culture and tradition of people in faraway corners in the world, traditions that will be lost in the future. So in a way, we're a time capsule trying to save, you know, if you look at our collection from I wish I could keep it for 50 years, but if you looked at it in 50 years, you know, you would see things in it maybe that don't exist anymore in terms of practice, and traditions that have been forgotten because the world is globalizing. This is another reason why I chose emerging markets as a place to go, because I feel this is a very crucial time from a very long-term perspective in the development of these societies. They're all going to undergo significant change. More and more we're going to see globalization take over and more homogeneity. And I think we'll lose something that is still out there today. If you go to Africa, there's still a very strong African, I don't know how to call this even, zeitgeist. You know, there's an African iconography as well. And I think with time that will get diluted. So I don't know, I hope that answers the questions.
Thank you. There are two more questions. So I'll start with Anya's question. She's saying, it sounds like you are doing a lot of great work to develop the collection and the artists. However, that generates high costs, travel, residency, collection maintenance. How do you manage the operating costs in the fund without a steady income flow, assuming artwork dispositions are not necessarily regular? Thank you.
That's a very good question. Obviously, someone who's thought about the logistics of managing a fund or a collection like this for investment purposes for the long term, that is truly one of the biggest challenges. And it's one of the reasons why many funds that have tried to operate have failed, because people don't understand that. You know, I say that in articles. I circulated an article today where there was a similar question and I answered it there. I hope you all get to read it. It's going to be published very soon in Art Africa magazine. In any case, to answer your question, investors pay a 2% management fee, and that management fee to a management company, and that 2% fee covers all the costs that are associated with paying me and my staff, paying for travel, paying for hotels, everything that has to do with the management of the collection. In addition, investors pay the holding costs of the collection. So there's the costs of storage, there's the costs of insurance, and you know, the costs of administering a fund, the legal costs. And altogether, these usually come up to, in the case of a $20 million fund like ours, it comes up to less than 1%. So the total cost for investors is 3% a year, which is not huge, but it's kind of high. And if you look at the 10-year horizon, which is what we do in the fund, we realize that we need to raise, to increase value by at least 30% just to cover the operating cost, the management fees, and which, you know, is 3% a year, which is doable if you're selecting smartly. But it is a challenge. And managing cash flow is, again, a challenge. I always try to keep some cash available to meet operating costs, etc. But most of the time we're fully invested as well. So sometimes redemptions are used to, liquidations of artworks are sometimes used to cover operating costs and sometimes to reinvest. In the first 5 years of the fund, I had the ability to reinvest. Now we're in the second phase of the fund, where I still have the ability as a fund manager to do that if I choose to, but that's not the plan. I'm planning to gradually liquidate, and as we raise capital, distribute that back to investors.
All right, thank you. So we have two more questions from Sarah. The first one, are you only accepting institutional money? I believe you said family offices too. Is there a minimum entry amount to participate in the fund?
Yes. So in this fund that we're talking about, the Tiroche DeLeon collection, this fund is closed for new investors. So no one can invest there right now. It was open to any kind of investor, but the minimum investment amount was $500,000. So it was relevant for wealthy individuals, family office and institutions and private banks. But most of our investors were just regular wealthy individuals who had an interest in getting to invest in art and collect art. One of the things I didn't mention also is that all of the works that we have in the collection are available for our investors to borrow. So we have some of our investors have decorated their entire homes or offices with works from the collection, which is fantastic as far as we're concerned, because that's really the core of what we want to do. We want to bring them closer to art and to make them, to turn them into collectors, and we want the art to be seen. And this is in houses or offices of, you know, wealthy individuals that have the right types of people who walk through their spaces and get exposed to these art. So that's a benefit for the artists. Plus, it saves us on storage and insurance costs, because that's covered by the investor who lends. And if the artworks are staying in an investor's house, if he or she fall in love with a specific work, they have the option to buy it from the fund at a predetermined premium to the book value. So we've thought about all of this in our operating memorandum well in advance of setting up the fund, which again is what sets our fund apart, I think, from any other fund in terms of how complex and how many details have been thought out in the offering memorandum.
Thank you. And then another question from Sarah. I think you spoke about it a little bit, but she's wondering what you think is leading to the value increase. Does being part of the Tiroche DeLeon collection affect that value?
Well, that's, you know, it's difficult, very difficult to say. I think for very young artists, you know, who want to show that they're being collected by important collections, being part of the Tiroche DeLeon collection may add some value, or being part of the residency program may add some value and some visibility. For the more established artists we have, like, you know, Abramovich, Wei, whatever, we're insignificant. We don't change anything in their markets. So it depends on which artists we're talking about. But in any case, I think, you know, we do add some value to young artists, less to established artists, but overall, I think we add the most value to our investors, and that's what really the fund is about, and to the general public who can, and to museums and institutions who can borrow from us. By the way, we don't charge fees for loans. We only ask the museums to pay, you know, the shipping and the insurance.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I don't think we have any more questions for now. So maybe you can talk more about the start now.
Oh, there was a question about investing. So yes, I am working on a new fund, which I hope to open sometime next year in 2018. I'm not entirely sure yet what the minimum investment will be, but it's going to be a fund that's focused more on Africa. As I mentioned, my interest is very much on Africa right now. And so if you are really interested, I'm sure we will have details in about 6 months, even maybe less, on, you know, minimum investment amounts and eligible investors. But in any case, it's going to be what's called an experienced investor fund. So not for retail investors. Sorry, so I'll continue now, I guess, with START, which is another angle of my activity that I started even before the Tiroche DeLeon collection. I spoke about it briefly, but it's basically an incubator that is fully funded by myself. There are no investors involved here, and it's been focused on helping the Israeli art ecosystem. Initially, it was an incubator for young artists. Later, we also developed a program for young curators to come and look at the works in the collection and borrow works from them, and or do exhibitions in our space. And we paid for, you know, the mounting of the exhibitions, and we paid a little fee to curators, and we had a sort of a curating contest, and selected, you know, 5 or 6 winning curators to do exhibitions. This is an example of our second such exhibition, Curating Start number 2, in our gallery space in Jaffa. My thing is stuck. How do I go to the next slide here?
I think you, yeah.
Okay, these are more images of another exhibition called Reseek that was held in our space as part of the Curating Start project. And all of the works you see are by contemporary Israeli artists from the last decade, basically. And I think Start today, my incubator, has the largest collection of Israeli art from the past decade. So pretty significant historically. With some artists, this is an example of an artist called Amir Naveh. There are, 3 or 4 or 5 artists that, out of 150 artists that I've worked with, there are 3 artists that I really sort of manage actively now and try to really help them develop their career. This is Amir Naveh, and this is an exhibition that Amir had that I helped organize at the Continua Gallery in Le Moulin in France in 2016. And just a few months ago, we had another exhibition, a solo exhibition for Amir in Art Market Budapest. And from that, a new gallery in France has just signed Amir and is doing an exhibition for him in March next year. And we're developing his career internationally. So that's part of the activity that we do through the START Incubator program. In Israel, we also work with major hotels. Like I said, we love to lend works. And what you see here is a work by Michel Platnik, another protege of mine that I've helped develop an international career for. And here is an example of a work of his that's on loan to the Norman Museum, which is the best boutique hotel in Israel by far, in Tel Aviv. And we helped with the art selection in the hotel, and there are quite a few pieces on loan from our collection there. Now I'll talk about, I was asked about the logistics and the high costs of running an operation like this. And this brings me to ArtRunners, which again, I realized how difficult it is. I knew it would be difficult because I had experience buying and selling art before, but doing that in emerging markets with large scale works made that complexity even bigger. And by doing that, I realized very quickly that, this world of logistics services is so inefficient, so outdated. There's so little information available on it. And at the time, there was nowhere where you could go. There wasn't a directory where you could find the names of shippers in India or whatever, Pakistan or Indonesia. I mean, you wouldn't know who to talk to. I would have to rely on galleries, and all the galleries would tell, oh, well, we don't have anybody good. Can you find us someone good? And so on and so forth. Extremely complicated and unprofessional packing, wrong completion of paperwork. So you have issues with tax and with export documentation, and things take much longer, and sometimes they get damaged on the way, and lots and lots and lots of complexities, and really time consuming and inefficient. And so the idea came up for ArtRunners. We said, how can it be that there isn't a platform where you can put in your request and receive, within a reasonable period of time, a few offers from vetted, art shippers around the world, whoever wants to do the job, whoever can do the job, that he can give you a quote, and just connect them on one platform so that people don't need to, go ahead and spend weeks trying to find who to talk to in the first place, and then several more weeks to request a quote and send all the information and do it in 20 different emails. And, and as a fund, my collection manager, Daniel, who's today the CEO of ArtRunners, he was frustrated because I told him I will not do any shipment unless we get 3 quotes. And getting 3 quotes sometimes takes a month. And when you get 3 quotes, you realize that the prices, the differences are huge. One quote can be, 4 times the price of another quote without really understanding why. So we decided we have to change this. And that was the reason we founded ArtRunners. That was in early 2015, and we're now almost 3 years later, and we have a fantastic platform that you can go in, you can put in your request once. Within 24 hours, you will get 3 or 4 quotes competing that you can compare easily because they're quoted to you on the same lines, and the requests will only be sent to shippers that are relevant for the specific shipment, because we have an algorithm that matches, simple things like the geography, the weight, the type of work, the condition in which it needs to be shipped, all of those things, and the request only gets sent to relevant shippers. So it's really a revolution, and we've spent more than 2 years developing this, working with a community of design partners, both customers and service providers on the other hand. And we've just launched it in beta a few months ago, and we're opening it up publicly on December 1st, which is in a few days. So anyone can go on the website and put in a request. I really think this is going to make the art world a much easier place to realize projects and dreams, and hopefully reduce costs and be more eco-friendly, and make managing art as an asset easier and perhaps less expensive. This is what one of the people who've used our platform and helped us with the design said about the platform after we launched it in beta. Through ArtRunners, I was able to input a request, obtain several competing quotes, and find the most relevant service provider for my shipment, all in a single day's work. This is Eugenio Iribaudengo, very, very well-known collector from Europe. His mother, Patrizia, owns the Fondazione Sandretto in Torino. And Eugenio is the guy behind ArtTuner, which is a platform that promotes young artists as well, an online platform. And they've been using us and they love it. And this is what service providers said about ArtRunners. Since participating on the ArtRunners platform, I'm not sure I can read this. Yeah, we have received a steady stream of varied inquiries from all around the world and many different realms of the art world that we may not have had the opportunity to quote for had it not been for the ArtRunners site. The website is easy to use, jobs can be quoted and booked quickly, the potential is unlimited. ArtRunners are creating a tool that can only improve the process of moving art globally. And this is what a quote looks like on our website, the comparing quotes, just to give you an idea.
Hello, and welcome to ArtRunners.
And there's a little movie here.
Marketplace for art logistics services. The platform enables efficient and consolidated shipping management for registrars, collection managers, and individual users. The Request a Quote page is dynamic and can easily be tailored by clients, while it delivers a standardized request form to service providers, which makes their process simpler, more accurate, and much faster. The selection process is therefore not just a function of price, but also of service level and specialized expertise. Our algorithm also takes into consideration the requirements of each specific shipment and matches that with the special capabilities and experience of each service provider. Another important aspect of the ArtRunners product for clients is the My Artworks page. Here, clients can upload and add details specific to each artwork. ArtRunners simplifies art logistics so customers can focus on their passion and shippers can extend their specialized services globally. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to contact us directly. We look forward to your input and hope you choose ArtRunners.